There is a story we've been told about autism, a story of deficits, a story of tragedy, a story of something that needs fixing. But like all stories, it depends on who is telling it and who is being spoken over. Today, I want to take you through the history of autism and the history of World Autism Day, not just as a timeline of events, but as a story of power, language, and identity. Because the way we understand autism today did not emerge naturally. It was built, layer by layer, choice by choice, and that means it can be rebuilt. Autism, as a concept, is a relatively new concept. The word itself comes from the Greek autos, meaning self. It was first used in the early 20th century by Eugene Bleuler, but not in the way that we use it now. It originally described a withdrawal into the self, a symptom, not an identity. Long before clinicians arrived with clipboards, human societies noticed people who moved, spoke, sensed, or focused differently. Medieval records describe holy fools, changelings, and reclusive savants. Some were feared, some protected, some exploited, and some quietly folded into community roles that valued intense focus or solitary craft. These accounts were not medical but cultural. Difference was interpreted through religion, superstition, or morality rather than neurology. Importantly, there was no unified category, just people who didn't quite fit the social rhythm of the time. The modern mistake is assuming that the absence of a diagnostic label meant the absence of autistic people. The opposite is closer to the truth. Autism existed, but interpretation varied wildly. Diagnostic labels are only a small part of the history of autism. Some of the earliest mentions of people exhibiting autistic expression are a Scottish court case regarding one Hugh Blair of Bourges in 1747, wherein a man with what is assumed to be higher support needs sought to secure his inheritance, and the Wild Boy of Aveyron, 1798, which regarded the case of a feral child called Victor and was documented by a French physician. While human records may be limited, it is likely that autistic people have existed as long as human brains have. Then, in the 1940s, two figures emerge: Leo Kanner in the United States and Hans Asperger in Austria. Kanner described a group of children as having early infantile autism. He framed autism as rare, severe, and marked by emotional detachment. Decades before Leo Kanner published his landmark paper, a Russian, later Soviet, psychiatrist named Grunya Sakhareva had already described what we would now unmistakably recognize as autism. In 1925, Sakhareva published detailed clinical accounts of children she called schizoid psychopathy in a German psychiatric journal. Rich portraits noting intense focus, sensory sensitivities, literal thinking, social differences, deep ethical concern, and remarkable talents. Her writing is strikingly modern. She framed these children not as broken, but as developmentally distinct, often thriving when supported rather than coerced. History sidelined her work for reasons that will sound depressingly familiar: gender, geography, language, anti-Semitism, and the politics of whose knowledge gets canonized in the history of autism. Asperger, on the other hand, described children with strong skills and intense interests, what later became known as Asperger's syndrome. But all of these early models share something important. They were observational, external, defined about autistic people, not with us. And they were shaped by the cultural and political environments of their time, including uncomfortable truths. Asperger's work, for example, was embedded within Nazi-era Vienna, where ideas of value, productivity, and worth were not neutral concepts. So, from the very beginning, autism was tied to questions of usefulness, normality, and deviation. As we move into the mid to late 20th century, autism becomes medicalized. It becomes something to diagnose, something to treat, something to correct. And this is where we see the rise of deeply harmful ideas. Refrigerator mother theory, pushed by Bruno Bettelheim, who himself was practicing psychiatry without any relevant qualifications to do so, asserted the idea that autism was caused by cold, unloving parenting. Let that sit for a moment. Families were blamed, parents were traumatized, autistic people were misunderstood. It is perhaps one of the earliest examples of institutionalized parent-carer blame. And then came behaviorism, the idea that behavior could be shaped, trained, and conditioned. This gave rise to interventions like ABA, applied behavior analysis, and later PBS, positive behavior support, which markets itself as a more affirming alternative to ABA while lacking any evidence to support this claim. These particular behaviorist interventions have been the subject of much criticism and pain in the autistic community. Behaviorist intervention constitutes a system built on the assumption that autistic ways of being are less desirable than neurotypical ones, that compliance equals success, that difference is something to be reduced. And while these approaches are often framed as help, they are rooted in a very specific value system, neuronormativity, the belief that there is a correct way to think, feel, and behave, and that everything else should move toward that standard. By the 1970s, something was shifting. Autism was starting to enter public awareness. Organizations began forming, campaigns began emerging. The National Autistic Society, for example, designated April as Autism Awareness Month. And this is where things get complicated because awareness is not neutral. Awareness can be empowering, but it can also be harmful. Many of the organizations that grew in prominence during this time framed autism through fear, through burden, through tragedy narratives. Some of the largest autism charities, Autism Speaks, even the National Autism Society, built entire campaigns around fear and sadness. The National Autism Society famously featured a green puzzle piece with a crying boy, while Autism Speaks pushed ideas such as autism is devastating, autism ruins families, autism must be fought. And these messages shaped public perception. They influenced funding, policy, research priorities. They told the world what autism meant, and often they did so without autistic voices at the center. It's important to say this clearly. Not all advocacy is good advocacy. Some organizations, past and present, have caused real harm. They have promoted cure-focused narratives, funded questionable or unethical research, centered non-autistic perspectives over autistic lived experience, and used fear-based fundraising strategies. There has been widespread critique of organizations such as Autism Speaks, the Autism Science Foundation, the National Council on Severe Autism, and others within that space. Critiques that highlight how these organizations dehumanize autistic people, frame us as problems to be solved, and exclude us from decision making. And this is not just ideological disagreement, this is about real world impact. When autism is framed as tragedy, it justifies harmful interventions. When autistic voices are excluded, it reinforces the very systems that marginalize us. So we have to ask, who gets to define autism? And who benefits from that definition? In response to this, something powerful begins to grow. The neurodiversity movement, led in the start by autistic people, grounded in lived experience. Neurodiversity as a concept grew out of the INLV Independent Living Community Forum in the early 90s, becoming a more publicly known concept when published by Judy Singer, who was incorrectly credited with its creation until around 2024, when archives of the old INLV forum revealed that the concept had been developed communally prior to the publication of Singer's work. The neurodiversity paradigm reframes autism not as a disorder, but as a natural variation of human experience, a form of neurological biodiversity. So, not as something broken, but something different. This doesn't deny distress and it doesn't pretend everything is easy, but it shifts the question from what is wrong with you to what is happening around you, what environments are you navigating, what systems are shaping your outcomes. And this is where the ecosystemic model that I often discuss fits so intimately. Distress is not isolated, it is relational. It emerges from the interaction between body, mind, environment, and systems. Autism, in this framing, is not a problem. The ecosystem is often what is creating the problem. And now let's come to World Autism Day. On December 18th, 2007, the United Nations declared April 2nd as World Autism Awareness Day. The resolution was proposed by Qatar and supported by all member states. The first official World Autism Day was observed in 2008. The stated goal was to highlight the need for improved support, greater understanding, and better quality of life for autistic people. And again, on the surface, this sounds positive. But we have to look deeper, because much of World Autism Day has historically focused on awareness over acceptance, visibility over understanding, and symbolism over structural change. Campaigns like Light It Up Blue became globally recognized, but they were also widely criticized by the autistic community for centering organizations that many autistic people do not support, for reinforcing deficit narratives, and for excluding autistic voices. So we're left with the question of who is this awareness for and what is its purpose? There has been a shift in recent years from awareness to acceptance to something deeper, justice. Because awareness is passive, acceptance is relational and often neutral, but justice is structural and actionable. Justice asks, are autistic people safe? Are we supported? Are we listened to? Are we able to exist as we are? It challenges systems, education, healthcare, employment, policy. It moves beyond campaigns and into action, and this is where NeuroHub Community sits. It's not just about raising awareness, it's about building community. It's not just sharing information, but shifting power. It's the recognition that when autistic people are able to connect with each other and find their own ways to thrive without being forced into someone else's box, we do better. So when we talk about the history of autism, we're not just talking about the past. We're talking about a living system, a story still being written. And the question is, who gets to write the next chapter? Because autism, it's not a static thing. It's shaped by language, by culture, by relationships. If we want a better future for autistic people, we don't just need awareness. We need better stories, better systems, and stronger communities. And most importantly, we need to listen to autistic people. If this video resonated with you, take a moment to engage with NeuroHub Community. We're building a space for community, connection, and change, because none of this happens alone. And every small act, every conversation, every shift in understanding is part of something bigger. So please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please share this video with someone, and please do check us out at neurohubcommunity.org. Thank you, and have a good World Autism Day.